the very first experience was when Jack Scott, who was part of the legislature in California, carried a bill that would allow the CSU system to provide an EdD. Always it had been that the UC did doctorates and not the CSU. But this was not a PhD program. The intention was what I would call a theory into practice program. And Jack Scott had that legislation passed, and it meant that the CSU system was able to manage various kinds of arrangements to do an EdD in educational leadership with a target particularly at people in the K-12 public school world for whom getting a PhD doesn't always make sense because they're busy on the job, they're principals, doing whatever program coordination. So in 2006, this all came about. And Michael Lewis was the dean at the time, and he was retiring that summer. And I was associate dean. And he said, Virginia, I know this is your area, ed leadership, and I know this is a huge task. So I'm not sure whether we want to do this now, should we wait? And I said, Michael, it isn't good to wait with this because the opportunity exists now, and best we get measured and go for it. So he said, well, it's really up to you to help this all happen. I said, I'd like to put a committee together. They need to work intensively over the summer, and we could provide a draft by the fall. And with the help of Carlos Navarez in ed leadership, Edmund Lee, who was a professor in ed leadership at that time, now retired, Miguel Ceja, who was from public policy area in the College of Social Sciences. And then we had Bob Pritchard, who was a professor in teacher education and was the chair of that department at the time. And then we had also Leela Jacobs, who was a professor in educational leadership, and I. And the six of us worked all summer long doing different parts of the work of putting together this program. I'm pleased to say that after a lot of drafts and revisions, we were able to meet the qualifications, and we were able to initiate a program on a cohort-based model for the next year. And the advantage of the cohort model, especially for people who are theory into practice people, is while you had some people in higher ed, you had a lot of people who could network and learn from each other of what their public schools or districts were doing with certain things and how they could improve it by digging more data, developing more information, and essentially really scaling up for how you inform decision making. So I think it's been a real boon to educators in the region of Northern California. Other CSUs have developed their EdDs also, not all of them, but many of them. And I think that ours has really been a good service to the community as well as to educators and students here. So the work that started intensively in the summer of 2006 has now resulted in more than a decade in many, many people out in schools helping provide better approaches to gaining decision-making material. And that's really what we want to do, because ultimately every child deserves a good teacher, and every teacher deserves good support and decision-making working with their administrators. Several of the alumni have become principals. Some have gone on to be assistant superintendents, program directors. There are also several superintendents who've come out of the group. And I think the networking that they have kept going through their cohort groups has been very useful for them. It's one thing to have all the official news, but when you have people you've developed a real trust with, then you get to know what might be a better set of conditions to inform you. You don't always get that from reading whatever the brief is. So we've got a lot of support, I think, from people who came into the program with one notion about what educational leadership really is. And I think that has been transformed in many ways, and those have been good for the service to our educational community. So we have people at the California Department of Education and people out there in school districts busy doing the work every day. Key part of it is, how do you manage the expectations of a doctoral program with the reality of working as a school administrator, for example. And you are busy all the time when you're a school administrator, but the program design of your first 2 years of class are dedicated to the classwork, and then your third year is really designed to develop your dissertation. And while some people need more than a year to complete it, if you've been very mindful in how you've constructed your work in the first 2 years, it certainly supports your work as you move into the dissertation. The EdD itself, I think, has provided many good pieces of research on the field. And right now, I've encouraged my master's thesis students to take a look at the dissertations coming out of the EdD program here and see what are those topics about, how are they constructed, what does the review of the literature suggest to them, how do the findings impact how they might think of it. And so I think the program is a resource for a lot of up-and-coming educational administrators too. So I found it to be, I think, very fertile ground in terms of people who are teachers. They have about 6 or 7 years of experience, maybe more, and they're considering coming into the administrative credential program. And so it's been good for them to see this material.